Obey me or break like glass. The cowboy's voice was gravel and thunder, his grip a band of iron on the woman's wrist. Outside the Bitter Creek saloon, a lone lantern threw dancing, monstrous shadows across the mud. She was pressed flat against the wall, her breath catching in her throat, every man on the boardwalk suddenly finding somewhere else to look. Every man but one. Let her go, a voice cut through the night. It was low, calm, and held the weight of a final warning. The cowboy's grip slackened. He backed away, melting into the shadows he came from. The story didn't start with a gunshot. It started with a promise of one. This is the story of a woman who came to Montana to capture light on glass, and a man who was drowning in darkness. But what they uncovered would threaten to burn the whole territory to the ground. Stick around, because the truth is always the most dangerous thing on the frontier. Montana Territory, 1883. Winter was a hungry wolf, chewing at the edges of the town called Bitter Creek. Ada Whitcomb stepped off the stagecoach and into the mud. She wasn't like the other women who came west. No lace, no feathers, just a camera case in one hand and a tripod in the other. Her hands were stained with chemicals, her eyes sharp. She'd learned a long time ago that photographs don't lie. But men always did. Across the street, Eli McCord watched her. He was a man carved from prairie rock and silence. He owned more land than a man could ride in a week, but 2 winters ago, he'd buried his wife, Hannah, on a lonely hill, and the fire in him had burned down to embers. All he had left was his 10-year-old daughter, Rosie, and a ranch a powerful syndicate was trying to steal right out from under him. He'd hired the photographer to get proof of his boundary lines. A business arrangement. Nothing more. That's what he told himself. Ada's room at the boarding house was small, the walls thin as paper. She could hear voices downstairs. A man's, low and sure, and then her landlady's nervous reply. She knew before the boots started up the stairs. Heavy, deliberate, each step a claim. The knock was short and sharp. She opened the door to a man who filled the entire frame. Eli McCord. His eyes were the color of a storm, and they weren't looking at her with curiosity. They were looking at her like a man judging livestock. "You're the photographer?" "Ada Whitcomb," she said, lifting her chin. His gaze flicked from her face to the camera on her bed. "Didn't expect a woman." "I've weathered harsher storms than you, Mr. McCord," she said, her smile cool as ice. A small figure peeked out from behind him. It was Rosie, her eyes wide with a child's unfiltered curiosity. "Papa? Is she going to make pictures?" Ada knelt. "Yes, I am. And maybe I'll make one of you." Rosie beamed, but Eli's hand settled on her shoulder. "Business first," he said. The words were a wall between them. "Tomorrow, first light, we ride to the north pasture. Don't slow us down." He turned and left, his boots thudding down the stairs. Rosie lingered for a second. "He sounds mean," she whispered, "but he ain't. Not really." Ada stood alone in the quiet room, a strange, unsteady rhythm in her chest. She had come here for a job, to capture truth on a glass plate. She had no idea the truth she was about to find was buried 6 feet deep. The dawn was brittle with cold. Eli rode ahead, a silent shape against the pale sky. Rosie chattered beside him, her breath pluming in the air. The land was raw, beautiful, and unforgiving. At the first ridge, Eli stopped. "This is the north line." Ada went to work. Her hands were numb, but her movements were sure and practiced. She slid the glass plate, coated it with collodion, and disappeared under the black cloth of her camera. It was a kind of magic, trapping a moment of time forever. Rosie watched, fascinated. "It's all upside down," she squealed, peering at the image on the ground glass. "That's how light bends," Ada explained. "But once it's fixed, it'll be right again." Eli watched them. Not the camera. He watched the way Ada's voice softened for his daughter. He watched the way she moved, with a stubborn grace that defied the biting wind. A gust nearly took the tripod, but he was there in a flash, his hand steadying it. "Your plates will shatter," he grunted. "Then I'll brace harder," she said, not looking at him. A muscle jumped in his jaw. They worked all day, ridge to ridge. Ada refused to stop, refused to falter. As the sun bled gold across the snow, she prepared her last plate of the day. Eli stood beside her, so close she could feel the heat of him against the cold. "You work harder than any man I've hired," he said, his voice quiet. "I've had to," she replied. On the ride back, Rosie's horse stumbled on a patch of ice. Before Eli could even move, Ada was there, leaning low from her saddle, grabbing the reins, her voice calm and steady as she soothed both the horse and the terrified child. Eli pulled up alongside, his face tight with a fear he rarely showed. He looked from his daughter, safe and sound, to Ada. The words wouldn't come. All he could manage was a nod that meant more than 1,000 words. Back at the ranch house, Rosie fell asleep at the dinner table. "I'll carry her," Eli said, but the girl clung to Ada. "Miss Ada's lighter," she mumbled. He followed them up the stairs. He watched as Ada tucked his daughter into bed, her touch impossibly gentle. When she turned, he was still standing in the doorway, his face a mask of shadows. "She hasn't let anyone but me do that," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "since her ma passed." Ada's heart ached for him. "Maybe she's just brave," she said softly. Downstairs, the wind howled. Eli poured 2 cups of coffee. The silence in the kitchen was thick with things unsaid. "I misjudged you." He finally broke it. "You wouldn't be the first," she said, meeting his eyes over the rim of her cup. A low rumble of thunder shook the house. A storm was rolling in, fast and violent. "Fence line will need checking," Eli said, pushing back his chair. "I'll come." "No, you've done enough. Stay inside." It was an order. Ada stood, her shoulders squared. "I don't break like glass, Eli." For a long moment, the storm inside the small kitchen was more powerful than the one raging outside. He looked at her, at this stubborn, practical woman who had somehow, in one day, slipped past every wall he'd built. He shook his head, a ghost of a smile on his lips, and walked out into the night. Ada stood by the window, watching the lantern light disappear into the driving snow. She wasn't just worried about the storm. She was worried about the way her heart was betraying her, step by painful step. Later that night, long after the storm had passed, Ada worked in a makeshift dark room she'd set up in the pantry. The smell of chemicals was sharp, familiar. She dipped the last plate from the day's work into the developer, watching the image slowly appear like a ghost. It was the north pasture, the boundary line, the creek bed, and something else. Something half buried in the snow near a stand of cottonwoods. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a fallen log. It had corners. It had markings. Her breath caught. She held the glass plate closer to the dim red lantern. The markings weren't a brand. They were letters, initials, H.M. Hannah McCord. But Hannah was buried on the hilltop, in the family plot. Eli had told her so himself. Why would her initials be on a marker in the middle of a frozen pasture, miles from her grave? A floorboard creaked behind her. Ada spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Eli stood in the doorway, his face pale. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the glass plate in her hand. "What did you find?" he asked, and his voice was not the voice of a grieving husband. It was the voice of a man who was terrified. The next morning, the world was silent, draped in a fresh blanket of white. But the silence in the ranch house was heavy, suffocating. Ada had shown him the photograph. He'd stared at it for a long time, his face unreadable, before tucking it away in a locked drawer. He offered no explanation. "Forget you saw it," was all he said, but Ada couldn't forget. The image was burned into her mind. Trouble rode in before noon. 3 riders, their horses kicking up plumes of snow. The man in the lead was wolfish, with yellow teeth and dead eyes. Eli met them at the corral. Ada watched from the porch, Rosie hiding behind her skirts. "Coulter," Eli said, his voice flat. "McCord," the man grinned. "Heard you got yourself a picture taker." His eyes slid over to Ada, oily and possessive. "Taking pictures of your land, are you? Be a shame if something happened to those pictures." This wasn't about cattle drifting. This was a threat, pointed and sharp. "You're not welcome here, Coulter," Eli said, his hand hovering near his pistol. Coulter's grin widened. "Just being neighborly. Wouldn't want you to lose anything else important. First a wife, then maybe a daughter." Rosie whimpered. Without a second thought, Ada stepped forward, shielding the girl. "You threaten a child on a man's land," she said, her voice ringing like steel. "You're a coward." Coulter's face darkened. "Careful, missy. This ain't no place for a mouthy woman." "Ride." Eli's voice was a low growl, a promise of violence that even a man like Coulter couldn't ignore. He spat in the snow, wheeled his horse, and galloped away, his men close behind. When they were gone, Eli turned to Ada, his face a storm of fury and fear. "You shouldn't have spoken." "And you should have?" she shot back. "He threatened your daughter. He mentioned Hannah. What aren't you telling me, Eli?" "It's not your concern," he yelled. "The hell it isn't. He threatened me too. What was on that pasture, Eli? What is Coulter so afraid of me finding?" His composure finally broke. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his eyes wild. "My wife didn't die of a fever," he bit out, the words torn from him. "She was riding the north pasture. Her horse came back without her. They said she was thrown. They said she hit her head." Ada stared at him, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "They lied," she whispered. "I could never prove it," he said, his voice breaking. "The sheriff, the doctor, they're all in the syndicate's pocket. They ruled it an accident. But Hannah, she was the best rider in this valley. She wouldn't have been thrown." Suddenly, Coulter's threat wasn't about land anymore. It was about murder. And Ada's photograph wasn't just a picture of a boundary line. It was evidence. And now, Coulter knew she had it. That night, the house felt like a tomb. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching hoofbeats. Eli sat at the kitchen table, staring at the locked drawer that held the photograph. Ada found him there, a single lamp casting long shadows across his haunted face. "He'll be back," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know." She sat across from him. "We have to do something. We can't just wait for him." "There's nothing to do," he said, his voice hollow. "It's my word against the syndicate, and my word ain't worth much around here anymore." "But it's not just your word," she insisted. "It's the photograph. It proves something was there, a marker, a grave. It proves they lied about where she was found." He finally looked at her, and she saw the depth of his despair. "And what good does that do? I take it to the sheriff? He'll laugh in my face before he tears it up and throws me in a cell, or worse." Upstairs, a small cry broke the silence. Rosie. A nightmare. Ada went up. She found the little girl sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror. "I saw him," Rosie whispered, her body trembling. "Saw who, sweet girl?" Ada asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The bad man, Mr. Coulter." Ada's blood ran cold. "When did you see him?" "That day," Rosie sobbed. "The day Mama went to heaven. I was playing by the creek. I saw him talking to her. He was yelling. She was crying. Then he pushed her." The confession hung in the air, a child's terrible secret finally set free. Rosie hadn't just seen an argument. She had been a witness to her own mother's murder, and Coulter knew it. His threat against Rosie wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Ada held the trembling child, her mind racing. This changed everything. They didn't just have a photograph. They had an eyewitness. She went back downstairs. Eli looked up as she entered, his face etched with worry. "Is she all right?" "Eli," Ada said, her voice low and urgent. "Coulter didn't just kill Hannah. Rosie saw him do it." The world tilted on its axis. The grief on Eli's face curdled into a black, murderous rage. He stood up, knocking his chair over, and strode towards the door, grabbing his rifle from the rack. "I'll kill him!" "No!" Ada grabbed his arm, putting herself between him and the door. "That's what he wants. If you ride out there now, you'll be dead before you clear the valley, and they'll call it self-defense. Then they'll come for Rosie, and for me." He struggled against her, his strength immense. But she held on, her eyes pleading with his. "You can't fight them with a gun, Eli. Not like this. We have to fight them with the truth." "What truth?" he roared. "A child's memory and a blurry photograph?" "It's more than you had yesterday," she said, her voice fierce. "He thinks we're scared. He thinks we're just a grieving rancher and a lone woman. He's underestimating us. We can use that." A desperate, dangerous plan began to form in her mind. It was reckless. It could get them all killed. But it was better than waiting for Coulter to come and finish what he started. "He wants the photograph," she said, thinking aloud. "He thinks it's the only proof we have. So we'll give it to him." Eli stared at her as if she were mad. "Have you lost your mind?" "No," she said, her eyes glinting in the lamplight. "We're going to set a trap, and you, Mr. McCord, are going to be the bait, and I'm going to be the one to spring it." They didn't have much time. They rode out the next morning, but not to town. They rode back to the north pasture, back to the stand of cottonwoods. The snow had melted some, and it didn't take them long to find the spot from the photograph. Under a thin layer of earth and ice, they found it. A crude wooden cross, weathered and gray, with the initials HM carved into it. This was where Coulter had buried her first, before moving her body to stage the accident. Eli fell to his knees, his hand tracing the letters of his wife's name. The rage was gone, replaced by a profound, soul-deep sorrow. Ada gave him a moment, then she went to work, setting up her tripod. She took another photograph, this one clear and undeniable, showing the marker and the surrounding landscape. Proof. Back at the ranch, they prepared. Eli sent his most trusted ranch hand into town with a message for the U.S. Marshal in the next county, bypassing the corrupt local sheriff entirely. It was a long shot. The message might not even get through. They had to assume they were on their own. Ada took the original blurry glass plate, the one Coulter wanted, and carefully packaged it. Then she took a blank plate and packaged it in the exact same way. The real evidence she hid. The last piece of the plan was the most dangerous. She took out her tin of flash powder, the fine magnesium powder she used to create light for indoor portraits. It was highly flammable, explosive, in the right quantity. She poured a generous amount onto a tin plate, setting it on the mantelpiece in the main room. A thin wire, almost invisible, ran from the plate down behind a chair. Now, all they could do was wait. Night fell like a shroud. Rosie was hidden in the cellar, silent and terrified. Eli stood by the window, a rifle in his hands, his face grim. Ada sat in a chair near the fireplace, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Just after midnight, they heard it. The soft crunch of boots on snow. Not one man. Several. Coulter didn't come to the door. The first they knew of his entry was the shattering of a window. A moment later, he stepped into the room, flanked by two of his men. He had a pistol in his hand, and his yellow-toothed grin was terrifying. "Evening, McCord," he sneered. "Came for what's mine." His eyes darted around the room, landing on Ada. And the picture. "It's over, Coulter," Eli said, his voice steady despite the rifle now pointed at his chest. "It's just getting started." Coulter chuckled. After you and the girl have a tragic accident. Fire, maybe. I'll be the hero who pulls the little one out. She'll be so scared, so confused. She won't remember a thing about what she saw. People will feel sorry for her. And for me, for having to take her in. The sheer evil of his plan hung in the air. Where is it? Coulter demanded, striding over to Ada. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. The glass plate. In the box, Ada choked out, nodding toward the small, packaged square on the table. Take it and go. One of Coulter's men picked it up. Coulter smiled, his victory assured. You see? Easy. He shoved Ada away from him, towards the fireplace. Now, for the fire. He nodded to his other man, who pulled out a match. Wait, Eli said. You get the plate. Let them go. This is between you and me. Coulter laughed. There is no you and me. There's just me. The man struck the match. The small flame flickered, casting a demonic glow on his face. He moved toward a pile of newspapers near the hearth. It was now or never. Eli, Ada screamed. The light! Eli understood instantly. He dove to the side as Ada pulled the thin, hidden wire. The tin plate on the mantelpiece tipped over, sending a cascade of flash powder down into the open fireplace. The world exploded in a silent, blinding flash of white light. The sheer intensity of the magnesium flash was stunning. The three men screamed, clutching their eyes, their vision completely whiter out. They were temporarily blind. In that split second of confusion, Eli acted. He brought the butt of his rifle down on the head of the man nearest him, who crumpled to the floor. The second man fired his pistol wildly, the bullet tearing through the ceiling. Coulter, though blinded, was still dangerous. He swung his pistol blindly, roaring in fury and pain. I'll kill you! I'll kill you all! Ada grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. As Coulter staggered toward the sound of her movement, she swung it with all her might against his gun hand. There was a sickening crack of bone, and the pistol clattered to the floor. He screamed, a raw animal sound, and lunged for her, his hands like claws. But before he could reach her, Eli was on him, tackling him to the ground. The fight was brutal, primal. Two men fighting in the dark, one for greed, the other for vengeance. It ended with Eli's hands around Coulter's throat, the life slowly being squeezed from the man who had destroyed his family. But then, a small voice cut through the chaos. Papa, stop! Rosie stood at the top of the cellar stairs, her face pale, holding a small lantern. Eli looked from Coulter's purpling face to his daughter's terrified eyes. He saw the abyss he was about to fall into, the man he was about to become. And he let go. Coulter gasped for air, scrambling backwards on the floor like a wounded animal. At that exact moment, the front door burst open. A tall man in a dusty coat stood there, a star pinned to his chest, flanked by two deputies. The U.S. Marshal. Justice had arrived. Spring came, washing the valley clean. The snow melted, the grass turned green, and the memory of that terrible night began to fade. The syndicate was broken. The U.S. Marshal, armed with Ada's photographs and Rosie's testimony, had rounded up every last one of them, from the corrupt sheriff to the men who rode with Coulter. The land was safe. The future was their own. One sunny afternoon, Eli took Ada and Rosie up to the hilltop. Not the lonely hill where Hannah had been buried, but a new one, overlooking the entire ranch. He had a new photograph in his hands, one Ada had taken just a week before. It showed the three of them, standing together on the porch, Rosie in the middle, smiling so wide her freckles danced. A family. I spent so long guarding ghosts, Eli said quietly, his arm around Ada's shoulder. I forgot how to live. We learned together, she said, leaning her head against him. Papa, Rosie said, tugging on his sleeve. Are you going to ask her? Eli smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and erased the last of the shadows. He got down on one knee, not in front of a grieving widow, but in front of the woman who had fought beside him. who had shown him how to fight for the light. Ada Whitcomb, he said, his voice full of a certainty he hadn't felt in years. Will you make this your home? Will you be my wife? Her answer was a quiet yes, that the wind carried all the way down the valley. They weren't just survivors. They were builders, creating a new life from the ashes of the old one. A life founded not on fear, but on a love that had been tested in fire and had come out stronger than steel. If you enjoyed this story of courage and justice on the frontier, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Ada's place.